Welcome to the MindSpark, bringing you the latest news from around the world. In the spring of 2025, Ottawa was tense, its atmosphere thick with anticipation and uncertainty. The city's beauty was on full display beneath its blooming cherry blossoms, but a sense of unease lingered in the air. The city's calm exterior masked a government in high gear, bracing for a looming economic storm from the U.S. Every corridor buzzed with urgent conversations and hurried footsteps. Prime Minister Carney's team had been preparing for months, running drills and late-night strategy sessions, determined to leave nothing to chance. Analysts and diplomats worked around the clock, modeling outcomes and drafting response plans, their eyes fixed on screens filled with shifting data and projections. The usual partisan noise faded, replaced by a rare sense of unity and purpose as leaders from all sides came together. On the streets, anxiety simmered. People wondered about jobs, prices, and the future of Canada's U.S. partnership. Conversations in coffee shops and grocery aisles turned to worry and speculation. The government's message was steady. Canada was ready, calm, and in control, determined to reassure a watchful public. Officials projected confidence, emphasizing preparedness and national strength, highlighting the country's ability to weather the coming storm. This early response set the tone, establishing a narrative of steady leadership in uncertain times, and signaling to the world that Canada would not be caught off guard. Across the country, a collective breath was held, but fear did not take hold. Instead, a quiet determination began to grow. The crisis would test Canada's resolve, but the groundwork for resilience was already in place, built on months of preparation and national solidarity. The stage was set for a defining national challenge, one that would shape the country's future and its identity for years to come. At the center stood Prime Minister Carney, known for his calm, data-driven leadership. He countered political drama with facts and logic, betting that substance would outlast spectacle. Carney's war room prioritized strategy over spin, bringing together ministers, civil servants, and industry leaders. The goal, a unified, nonpartisan response that put national interest first. Daily briefings focused on vulnerabilities, allies, and the ripple effects of U.S. actions. Carney's public addresses were clear and reassuring, never alarmist. The government released data showing U.S.-Canada economic ties, appealing to reason at home and abroad. International media engagement reinforced Canada's calm, rational stance. The message, in chaos, be the voice of reason. Canada trusted that logic and unity would prevail over impulsive politics. This disciplined approach became Canada's greatest asset. The world was watching and taking note. The blow landed with a late-night Trump tweet and a morning press conference, sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods. Steel, aluminum, lumber, and agriculture were hit hard, shaking Canada's economic core. Factories scrambled, supply chains faltered, and the Toronto stock market plunged. The national security justification was met with disbelief. Canada, America's closest ally, now cast as a threat. The move was seen as political bullying, not genuine policy. Shock turned to anger. Canadians felt betrayed and vulnerable. The dollar weakened, layoffs loomed, and families worried about their livelihoods. This was more than economics. It was a blow to national identity and trust. The crisis forced Canadians to confront the fragility of their U.S. partnership. The tariffs were not just numbers, they were a wake-up call for the entire nation. The stakes had never felt higher. Canada's response would define its future. Ottawa's response was swift and methodical, not panicked. From the very first moment, Canadian officials understood the stakes and moved with a sense of calm urgency, determined to protect the nation's interests without escalating tensions. Carney's war room became the nerve center, filled with economic models, real-time data, and a constant flow of information. Here, every decision was informed by evidence, not emotion. The first step, analyze the tariffs' impact in detail and identify which U.S. states and industries were most vulnerable to Canadian countermeasures. Teams compiled compelling evidence of North American economic integration, mapping out which U.S. districts and communities would suffer most from a prolonged dispute. This data armed American business leaders and politicians, giving them the tools to push back against the tariffs and advocate for a return to stable trade. Diplomats worked overtime, framing the dispute as a threat to global trade rules, not just a bilateral spat. They emphasized the broader consequences for international stability. Canada built alliances with U.S. governors, industry groups, and international partners, forging a united front that transcended borders and political lines. Many Americans were alarmed by the tariffs' impact on their own jobs and local economies, realizing the interconnectedness of the two nations. Calm, measured communication was key. Carney's team avoided personal attacks, focusing on principles, facts, and always leaving the door open for negotiation and dialogue. Canada positioned itself as the mature, reliable partner, drawing a sharp contrast with the chaos and unpredictability in Washington. The world took notice, and support for Canada grew. International media praised Ottawa's steady approach, and public opinion abroad shifted in Canada's favor. The response was strategic, disciplined, and rooted in facts, with every move carefully calculated to maximize impact and minimize risk. Canada's coalition building and data-driven diplomacy became its shield, protecting its interests while maintaining its reputation on the world stage. The crisis was now a test of patience and resolve, demanding both endurance and adaptability from everyone involved. The groundwork for a breakthrough was quietly being laid as teams worked behind the scenes to find common ground and lasting solutions. Ottawa's steady hand was winning hearts and minds both at home and abroad, proving that principled leadership could make a difference in turbulent times. Ottawa and Washington became studies in contrast. Carney's government moved with discipline, briefings, strategy sessions, and unified messaging. The focus was on solutions, not political theater. In Washington, confusion reigned, mixed messages, policy reversals, and internal squabbles. The White House's unpredictability unsettled both Canadians and Americans. Canada refused to be drawn into the drama, responding with calm, fact-based statements. This frustrated the U.S. side, which thrived on confrontation. The international community saw Ottawa as a model of responsible governance. Canada's steady approach attracted allies and strengthened its position. The chaos in Washington became Canada's strategic advantage. In a world of noise, Canada's order stood out. The contrast shaped the outcome of the crisis. Across Canada, shock gave way to quiet resolve. Communities rallied, supporting affected workers and buying Canadian. The government's calm, transparent communication built public trust. Anxiety was real, but so was solidarity. People understood this was a national challenge. Media coverage was sober and informative, avoiding panic and partisanship. Canadians valued policy over rhetoric, looking to their leaders for stability. The public's trust gave the government space to execute its long-term strategy. This collective maturity was Canada's secret weapon. The crisis became a test of unity and patience. Canadians chose resilience over reaction. The nation stood together, ready for whatever came next. The groundwork for recovery was set. The negotiations began, a true clash of styles and strategies, with tension thick in the air as both sides prepared for a high-stakes battle. Canada's team arrived in Washington, meticulously prepared and armed with data, detailed charts, and clear, well-reasoned arguments to support their case. Their approach was logical, respectful, and always focused on finding practical solutions, emphasizing facts over emotion. In contrast, the U.S. side relied heavily on catchy slogans and shifting positions, often changing course as political winds shifted in Washington. The process was often frustrating and tense, but Canada's negotiators stayed patient, professional, and composed under pressure. When counter-tariffs became necessary, they were carefully targeted to maximize political pressure on the U.S. while sparing Canadian consumers as much as possible. Products like bourbon and cheese were chosen to hit key Republican states, sending a clear message that trade is a two-way street and consequences are real. Soon, U.S. business groups and state governors, now armed with Canadian data and analysis, began pressing the White House to reconsider its approach. Canada's calm, steady diplomacy stood in sharp contrast to America's unpredictable and sometimes chaotic tactics. Around the world, Canada was increasingly seen as a champion of order, reason, and principled negotiation. As pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in the U.S. position, with officials showing visible signs of stress and uncertainty. Gradually, logic and evidence were winning over loudness and bluster, swaying opinions and shifting the momentum. The tide was unmistakably turning in Canada's favor, as their strategy began to pay off. A breakthrough was now within reach, promising a new chapter in the negotiations and hope for a fair resolution. The breakthrough came quietly. The White House suspended tariffs, bowing to pressure at home and abroad. Canada's calm, principled strategy had prevailed. Carney welcomed the decision without gloating, focusing on rebuilding the partnership. The crisis sparked a shift. Canada accelerated trade deals with Asia, Europe, and emerging markets. Diversification became the new blueprint for economic security. Investments in infrastructure and global trade networks followed. Canada would never again rely so heavily on a single partner. The lesson: resilience and strategy matter more than bluster. Canada emerged stronger, respected, and more globally minded. The world took note. Calm leadership and unity can triumph in turbulent times. Canada's power play became a model for others. The crisis of 2025 forged a new, resilient Canada.